Hey guys, it's Sean, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I just wanted to quickly walk you through my submission for the Enterprise DNA Football Players Summer Transfer Competition that is going on this month in November 2022. I love entering these contests that Enterprise DNA and Maven Analytics and a whole bunch of others are hosting. One of my favorite things about being a Power BI developer in 2022, as opposed to when I started several years ago, is how much the community has grown and how much various companies around the world have helped really bring the community together through these Power BI competitions. And so every other month or so, I do try to enter these competitions. Obviously, November's a really great month for me because the World Cup is coming up. And so almost all of these companies are doing soccer challenges, and I am a kid in a candy store right now. This particular data set was exciting to work with. Enterprise DNA had a prompt that basically they wanted this Power BI report to have the look and feel of a really slick PowerPoint or slide deck. And so even though I incorporated a lot of Power BI elements that I really like, and even though I'll be honest, I did stray from the prompt on a couple of occasions, I wanted to make sure that by and large I did make everything kind of feel like a PowerPoint deck. So, you can see that on the first page of this, I kind of made sure that my design gives you some information over on the left to sort of set the scene. I included the Enterprise DNA logo. I've got the name of my report here. I included the season or year of the transfer window that is happening. In this specific prompt that Enterprise DNA gave us, this is all being put together for a Miss Angie Claire Verdadero, who's the presenter. She's the CFO of Enterprise DNA Football Association. I also thought that, okay, why should Angie get all the credit? I made sure that I gave myself credit as the analyst, as a Power BI developer, and I even, of course, threw some plugs for myself if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, or obviously if you're here on Sweatpants BI, looking at my YouTube channel where you can see me actually walking through this report. And then, when we get over here, I've started just putting together kind of since this is staged as a PowerPoint presentation, obviously I'm going to want some kind of a landing slide or welcome for the hypothetical audience of this report. So you can see that I built a view here first that just is kind of a welcome page. This would be where I would imagine that the presenter, in this case, Miss Angie Claire Verdadero, is going to present, who she is and kind of set the scene for talking about this 2022 to 2023 summer transfer period. Thought this would be a great place to just kind of put some summary descriptive measures here, like how many players were transferred in the window, how many leagues were engaged in these transfers, or how many leagues specifically were players transferred to, how many clubs, how many countries, and then how many dollars in fees were paid to transfer these players. And hint, it's a lot. It's a lot more money than I'm ever going to see. And if you're wondering how I put together, just this first page, like almost everything that I do, it starts over here in PowerPoint, and you can see that all I did first was I just kind of designed the background that I'm going to use across everything that I built in Power BI. So I've got little placeholders here for my navigation options. You may have noticed when I was actually in Power BI that I've got little soccer balls that pop up indicating, which view you're on. I've got, just some text over here for information about the report that isn't going to change. So all of this is stamped right into my background. And since there's no data involved whatsoever, I'm just going to export this background from PowerPoint into Power BI so that I can use it as the background for all of my data visuals. And then after that, I made just a big image that I'm also going to export out of PowerPoint. And here, just put some more text on it, made it seem like this was something that Angie had put together to sort of introduce herself and welcome anybody to this tool. And then I also just created, some rounded corner rectangles, put those into position with some icons, knowing that in Power BI I would actually overlay cards containing the specific measures that describe these placeholders. And then just to, again, kind of set the scene, I just found an image on Unsplash, just a stock photo of a soccer ball, made it super gray. If you know me, most of the time I'm going to tell you never, ever use photographs or images like this. In Power BI, you want to keep everything focused on the data. But since this is more of a presentation that is given to like, hypothetical executive group, I decided, hey, just to put a little bit of color in this and get a real soccer ball in the report, I added just one little image to this, and then I exported it right back to Power BI, where you see it here. You can see my cards individually laid over top of the placeholder rectangles that I had put together in PowerPoint. And now we're ready to go. So welcome to my challenge submission. I'm going to go ahead and trigger the bookmark for the next view, and you can see immediately the soccer ball changed, indicating that I'm now looking at demographics. A lot of the questions in Enterprise DNA's prompt were sort of focused around understanding more about the different ages of players. So I made sure that I had a visual here that just highlights the fact that the average player was 25 years old, with ages ranging from 16 to 37, and I just included a horizontal bar chart to sort of capture the distribution of the different ages of players. Then I had some space to kill, and again, this is supposed to be more of a presentation. I want to, give users of this report, some information to hopefully kind of make them want to read through this. So I just called out a couple of additional data points that I thought were funny from the data, including that, 2 players in the transfer portal were only 16 years old and probably making far more money than I do at almost 37. And I also thought that it was interesting that, in Andorra, the oldest player was only 21 years old, which is barely old enough to drink in Kentucky, where I'm from. And then, my one thing that I do that I just think helps make data visuals a little bit easier to consume is, presenting the question that the data visual is intended to answer right up front. So in this case, one of the questions was, tell me more about all of the players that are under 18 years old. And it looks like there were 13 of them. So if you were interested in where the youngest players in Europe are ending up, it's Germany, Italy, Spain, England, France, all places where I would much rather be right now than in cold Kentucky, which is covered in snow at the moment. And if you were interested in knowing more about the oldest players by country, in the background, I did a little bit of data modeling just to figure out who the oldest and youngest player are in each country. I also just determined that because I didn't actually have like birth dates in the data set, I just had ages, and there were a lot of players. I actually ran into quite a few countries where multiple players had the same age. So if you look at this example of China, there are actually a couple of players who were both 31, being the oldest players in those countries. And in Brazil, there were quite a few players who were only 20 years old, representing the youngest players there. So since I had kind of, some countries that had multiple players, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to capture the highest and lowest ranges here, I thought that a matrix would be the best way to sort of capture that information. And since we're kind of grouping all of the youngest players by country and the oldest players by country, I also thought that it might be interesting to compare the different fees that were paid in the transfer window for older players versus younger ones. And, obviously it pays to be young and talented. So it does look like if you've got your entire career ahead of you and maybe you're already super talented, chances are you're racking up some pretty good fees in this transfer window, way over $1 million, in fact. For my next view, I wanted to do a little bit more focused on positions. One thing that I did notice in the data set is that there were a few positions that were listed for players that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I kind of regrouped the positions in a way that I found a little bit more intuitive to visualize. One position, for example, I think was just attack, and there was only one player. So I just went ahead and lumped that player in with our center forwards. Once I had sort of remodeled the data into what I considered to be 11 pretty common positions on the soccer field, having been a soccer player myself for many years, that just allowed me to have a little bit more fun with this view on the different positions. It allowed me to sort of bucket the different positions by defensive, offensive, and playmaking. So if you're a defender, chances are you're playing in the back or you're playing defensive mid. If you're an offensive player, you're playing in a forward position or attacking midfield. And if you're a playmaking position, you're basically everyone else in midfield. So from here, I was able to see, okay, which positions saw the most movement. And it looks like, a lot of teams were recruiting for new players right smack in the middle of the field, center forwards who are obviously going to score a lot of goals, hopefully center backs who are hopefully going to present a lot of goals, and center midfielders who are usually your star playmakers, in my opinion. Which I thought it was interesting, though, that goalkeepers, not a whole lot of them going around, but then again, I would imagine that there are fewer people to actually fill those positions. Below that, I was able to just kind of game the standard bar and line chart to sort of make a matchstick chart, really just to kind of mix this up visually a little bit more. So even though this might look like some kind of custom visual that I made, it's just a bar chart with lines. I actually created this just by making the bars super, super skinny. The lines that are running across the top of this are just at 0 point weight, which makes the lines themselves invisible. And then of course I left the markers and made those large to sort of create this matchstick effect. Again, it was more of just an aesthetic thing. I was I usually use these competitions to sort of play with different types of data visuals and different ways of doing things. And so this was more of a Sean experiments and maybe it kind of worked example. Down the middle, I'm answering some of the questions that Enterprise DNA presented in the prompt, including who is the highest paid player based on fees in the data set. Looks like it's this Anthony person, and their market value was $35 million. Again, kind of humbling for me as just a Power BI developer. I thought it was interesting that the highest market value among all players was Erling Haaland at $150 million, which is a lot of change. The highest paid player by position is listed below this, and literally I just created a measure, a rank X measure that ranked all of the different positions by the fees that were paid for those players and captured those here, again in either a table or a matrix. I do believe it's a matrix. And then in this section, I started just kind of playing with the different positions on the field and how I could visually describe those positions. And so here, since Enterprise DNA was kind enough to provide an image of a soccer field, I just used PowerPoint to flip that image around and make it gray tone. I will flip back to PowerPoint very quickly just to show you. I imported, I think their soccer pitch was green. I brought it in here, and since it was just an icon, I was able to make these any colors that I wanted. I ultimately opted with gray since ultimately I want people to just know it's a soccer field, but I don't want the color to be too distracting. So I made the soccer field gray and brought that into the background of a scatter plot. And then I created my own table where I plotted the different positions, their location on the field to X and Y coordinates that would translate to a scatter plot so that I could actually visualize all of the positions on a field any way that I wanted to. So you can see you've got the goalkeeper, the defensive line, midfield players, and our forwards. And currently, these are weighted by the amount of money or fees that were paid at each position. And if you hover over each position, you can actually see the fees that were paid for, I think, the top 10 players. I can't remember what I set the tooltip to actually show, but you can see it's not everyone, just a sampling of the 10 highest paid players at each position. And again, the coloring and sizing of the different dots is currently weighted by the total amount of fees paid at each position. And all of that is also summarized here on the right in descending order from attacking to defending. On the next view, I thought, it might be really interesting to understand more about where the players are going. And honestly, this was just an excuse to use a shaped map. I'm a sucker for a map. Anytime I can visualize data on a map, chances are I'm going to do it. So if you're interested in knowing where players in this transfer window are going, looks like they're primarily going to Italy, England, Spain, France, Germany, and Turkey. We did have a tie here. That's why we have France and Germany both at 4. And if you're interested in where outside of Europe players are going, I actually kept all of the European values in here since they dominate so much of the data. And they help contextualize the players that you can see here that are going to Brazil, Mexico, the US, Argentina, UAE, Qatar, all the way down to some of the other countries that have a fairly small number of players who are entering. And the visual down here was my attempt at sort of visualizing, okay, a lot of players are moving back and forth in any given transfer window, but I'm trying to understand, which countries are gaining players and which ones are losing them. So the bars in the background here represent the number of players that were both coming and going from each country. And then the dots actually represent the net gain or loss during the transfer window. So that if you're interested in understanding, which countries actually gained players on the other side of the transfer window, that would be Turkey, Italy, Netherlands, and so on and so forth. Like it looks like Turkey actually picked up a net change of 37 additional players. Whereas on the other extreme, it looks like France and England both lost 25 players, resulting in a net loss of players through the transfer window. Moving now to clubs, this was one of the last views that I actually built. In this go-round, there weren't a whole lot of questions, I believe, in the prompt specifically focused on the clubs, but there was one question sort of focused on the English Premier League, so I thought that this would be a good place to sort of talk about the English Premier League as a whole, as a spotlight, because there was a lot of really interesting movement in the Premier League. I wish I could say that I personally have a Premier League team, but being somebody who grew up in sort of the middle of nowhere in Kentucky, not a lot of us have Premier League teams. We're usually lucky to root for whichever team happens to be on TV, assuming that a Premier League game is actually playing in Kentucky on TV. But I did kind of, continue the theme that I had on this previous view by talking about, some of the different clubs and which ones lost the most players and which ones gained the most during the transfer season. And then I thought that it might be interesting to look at the top 20 clubs that were spending a lot of money for the privilege of top talent. And as soon as I started making this visual, I did notice that a lot of them were English Premier League clubs. So I just used a pop of color to help somebody immediately interpret this visual and also notice, man, a lot of Premier League teams are paying top dollar for football and or soccer talent, which is not terribly surprising based on my understanding. As far as my league spotlight, I thought that it was interesting to call out that not just are players being paid a lot in this transfer window in the English Premier League. On average, according to my analysis, it looked like the English Premier League was actually paying more than anyone else for players anywhere on the pitch. So if we're looking at the average fees paid per player for the positions that I sort of reorganized, and if you compare the Premier League to some of the other huge leagues like the Bundesliga or Serie A, you can actually see that the Premier League, which is called out with these larger white dots, is actually at the top at almost every single position on average. And then if you're understanding more about which EPL team recruited the most transfers, in a given window, I created just this table with some data bars built in so that you can immediately come down here and notice, okay, it looks like Nottingham Forest actually had the most new players transferred. And beyond that, I thought it might be interesting to understand, the value ratio there. In other words, which clubs are paying more or less in fees for the stated market value of the players in the data set. So it looked like Aston Villa actually got, the best bang for their buck. They paid only about half in fees for the total market value that it looks like they obtained. And then I created kind of this heat map over here based on the groupings that I did on the position so that you can kind of walk through and understand where are these clubs getting the most bang for their hypothetical dollar. And so it looks like Aston Villa must have made some really smart purchases at defense. Looks like Manchester City's looking for scorers and maybe got some bargain there. And then it goes all the way down to the bottom. The next view that I created, which is really the last view and what I would consider my serious submission to the competition, is trying to understand, what does the perfect starting 11 look like just based on the players in this transfer window. And so I thought that a really smart way, if I were managing a club, to sort of look at all of this data would be first to have a scenario where we're trying to maximize the total amount of market value that we're obtaining while also minimizing age. So this is a scenario where I'm imagining that I've got all the money in the world. I just want to get as much market value. I want to get the best players that I can get, and I want to try to make sure that I'm getting the youngest players possible so that hopefully these players are going to be around for a while and they're going to continue to grow and kick ass for my club as opposed to going somewhere else. So in scenario one, I'm basically ranking all of the players in the data set based on their market value. And then I'm also ranking all of the players in ascending order by their age so that I can then come up with sort of a surrogate ranking that now balances market value being as high as possible with age being as low as possible. And this is the result that I got when accounting for that ranking at every single position. So, I've got Erling Haaland as my center forward. That sounds like a big win. He was expensive, but hey, he's only 21 years old. So hopefully he's got some legs on him. Hopefully he's going to be, kicking butt for my team for a while. Going through some of the other positions, I don't necessarily recognize all of the names, but you can see by and large, almost all of these are tending to be younger players. And if you look at their market value, almost all of them are fairly high market value players. So, maybe I decided, okay, what if I need to bring down the costs here? Because while I'm getting $511 million in market value, my fees paid are also through the roof. And maybe I'm like, $353 million is probably a stretch. I thought that another scenario that might be interesting to do was to sort of re-rank all of these things. But in this scenario, what I'm trying to do is maximize my market value while decreasing the fees that I'm paying for players. And in this situation, there's no age cap. I'm not worried about how old the players are. I just want top talent and I want to minimize my fees. So here I was able to re-rank everything, and you can see that my market value is honestly about the same. My players are quite a bit older, but I'm still getting some really, really solid players at a bit of a bargain in terms of that a lot of these players don't have the extravagant fees that scenario one had. I've got Lukaku for only $8 million. He's 29, but hey, we'll take him. I've got Paul Pogba, no fees whatsoever. That seems like it's got to be a mistake, but hey, it's in the data, so I went with it. Also 29 years old, no problem, come on over. So at least, here's a scenario where I'm keeping my fees as low as possible, but still getting a lot of value. And then literally just for fun, I thought, hey, what does the worst possible squad look like? I'm calling this my suicide squad. Let's embrace the chaos and recruit exclusively inexperienced bargain players. So here, my rankings are going to account for the lowest market value possible, the lowest player fees, and the lowest age. I feel like this is a team that I could just about pay for out of my own pocket today, which that's a joke in case you can't tell. I trust me, I'm not this rich. But if you go through every single position, now we've got players who, have the lowest market value in the data set. They've got extremely low fees. And of course, they're all basically babies. They're like 17, 18 years old. We got some 16-year-olds in here. Maybe they'll grow into amazing players. Maybe these are all names that you're going to know a couple of years from now. But something tells me if I recruit this group, and they're very, very good, they're probably not staying at my club, because in the Suicide Squad scenario, God knows I can't afford them. But one of the questions in Enterprise DNA's prompt was, hey, who would your starting 11 be? And that's a very, very loaded question, especially for someone who has all this data at his fingertips. I wanted to present a couple of different scenarios. I need to know, is money no object? Do I have to keep market value below a certain amount? So this was just a cool way that I designed with some dynamic ranking and some bookmarks sort of happening behind the scenes that are triggered by these different buttons. In case you're wondering how I set this up, I've got a hidden slicer over here that you're never going to see, but that slicer is actually triggering different measures as I click through based on the selection of the slicer that is determining my rankings for everything else that you're seeing here. And then finally, again, this is kind of getting away from the prompt because ultimately we're trying to design sort of a PowerPoint presentation here. But I was a kid in a candy store or a bull in a China shop, depending on your interpretation. And I wanted to play with this data. So I also thought that it would be really, really cool to build an interface where anybody could come in here and kind of build their own perfect 11. Just using some of the different variables in the data set. I could have gotten even crazier with this, but I really just said, okay, let's imagine that somebody wants to kind of play with the best players at each position, but they want some precision control over the market value, the fees, and the age at each position. So, right out of the gate, the market value and fees, the best possible players that I'm getting here, without accounting for age, fees, and market value at all. I've got like Raheem Sterling here at left mid wing. He's 27 years old. He's expensive. Maybe I'm thinking, I really just can't afford Raheem. So I'm going to go over here to my left mid winger slicer, and I'm like, I'd really like somebody younger. In fact, I'd like somebody ideally who's 22 or younger. Okay, so it looks like that updated. Now I've got Sofiane Diop. I'm not familiar with the player. I'm sure they're amazing. But so maybe that's somebody who's a much better fit for what I'm trying to get at 22 years old or 22 years old. Maybe I'm looking up here at my attacking mid, and I'm like, oh, I really don't know if I can afford $143 million for my attacking mid. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can drop that down to $50 million. Looks like I'm still looking here. There we go. There we go. And so $32 million will get me this player instead. Maybe I'm looking at my goalkeeper and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, 23 is fine, but 21 would be better. This is going to update and give me a new player. You all get the point at this stage, but I just really, really wanted to come in here and see if I could build something a little bit more interactive that would allow users to sort of drag and toggle, some of the different data values going on behind the scenes so that they could build a hypothetical starting 11 that are perfect for their budget, for their fees, while also sustaining as much market value as possible. So anyway, there you have it. That is my Enterprise DNA submission. I haven't even sent this off yet. If you're watching this video, you may be literally watching this before I've even actually officially entered the competition. But I'm super, super excited about it. I'm gonna wait a little while to submit this bad boy so that I'm not too early to the party. But had a blast building this report. Super, super grateful to Enterprise DNA for putting this challenge together and for asking some really great questions that kept me super motivated to build the best Power BI report possible. If you have questions about anything that I've built in this, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. If you want me to share this file with you after the competition is over, I'd be more than happy to do that. I definitely don't mind sharing the things that I build as long as there's not a prize on the line. So anyway, thank you so much for checking out this video. I've got some more contest entries coming down the pipeline and some other really cool Power BI builds that I'm just doing in my spare time. Cannot wait to walk you through all of those and show you what ideas I've got. Hopefully they're things that you can use in your own job to build the most amazing Power BI reports possible. Thank you so much for checking out my video on YouTube. I'll see you next time.